9:39. Good morning to you. Sorry, my lips are very dry today. They're cracking a little bit.
He was handed lip balm on a little spoolie earlier, weren't you, by our lovely makeup artist?
I was, yeah.
Very, very fancy. Get the best treatment around here, Stephen.
They're so dry, it's terrible. Anyway, let's go through the papers this morning. Joining us is writer, journalist and dry-lipped aficionado, Andy Jones, and Ella Whelan, whose lips look very plush this morning.
You look wonderful, Ella.
I don't know why I'm just don't ask me why. I'm just...
He hasn't had his porridge yet this morning. He's delirious.
The brain is going.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Mail, Andy, looking at re-educating non-PC pupils.
Yeah, it sounds very North Korea, doesn't it? Very sort of sending off to re-education camps. It's not quite that bad, although it's slightly alarming. Re-educating 9-year-olds and children at primary schools. This is only at 9 schools, Church of England schools in the South East. And essentially there's been concern that children are using non-PC language. They're saying things like, that is mental, or don't be a girl, don't be a sissy. What this particular trust of 9 schools is saying is, if they say it once, they get telling off. If they say it a few times, they then go to a re-education session and take teachers accordingly.
Which trust is this?
This is a Church of England trust in the South East, 9 different schools.
I mean, it's not necessarily... My instant reaction is to go, well, this is ridiculous. Some things at that age it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It depends how severe the thing that they're saying. I mean, when I was at school and I said something that was a bit mean, the teacher would just go, now, and that would be the end of it, right? And it would take quite a lot for your parents to be called in. I worry a little bit that you're then making this child feel absolutely ashamed, horrified, because, you know, their parents... If your parents are brought in when you're a child, it feels really, really serious, doesn't it? And I think actually it's a little bit... Is this a bit overkill? Is it a bit of an overreaction? There's nothing inherently wrong with saying to kids, maybe you could say something a bit nicer there instead of saying somebody's a big sissy or something.
I think it's a balance between you obviously don't want bad behaviour, and teachers should have the authority to discipline their students, but you also don't want to create a climate in which kids are told that tiptoeing around each other is a good way to be, you know, because you want to be able to be free to you know, not feel overly sensitive around each other. I mean, something like this is mental. I think most people can see that there's a difference between saying, you know, for example, oh, that's so gay, which was something that we now, you know, most people say that's not very pleasant, don't say that. But a difference between that and this is mental, which I think is probably most people still. I think I say that's mental.
But I don't disagree with children being taught. Do you know what? Because it reminds me of, and if you're old enough to remember, Joey Deacon, who was I can't remember how old he was now, but he was a disabled person anyway, who was featured on Blue Peter.
And he became a byword for...
Well, it did. Everyone around schools, he would get being called a Joey. I remember that at school. And in fact, it got so widespread that I remember Blue Peter did a whole thing saying it is not right. You cannot go around calling people a Joey. You know? And quite right too. Actually. So, well, it's that sort of thing where you can soften some of the terms that people are using.
And I think it's just, I think probably we're over, like you said, your instinct is to say that's mental or that's too much. And I think it's because we do have, I mean, we just covered in the last paper review the Road Dial censorship. We do have so much of this at the moment in society that that you can forget that, you know, teaching kids manners just on a basic level is something that I think we should still probably do.
Can we have a look at the SNP? Because there's been all this hoo-ha over who's going to take over the SNP and whether they're for or anti equal marriage. And Hamza Yousaf said, well, I'm all in favour of equal marriage, but now it seems he didn't actually vote on it.
Yes, well, the knives are out in this election contest, and to see who's going to be the leader. And a former Health Secretary, Alex Neil, has come out and called nonsense on Hamza Yousaf's claim. So Hamza Yousaf says that he didn't go to the second vote or the final vote of equal marriage legislation because he had a meeting with the consulate from Pakistan and it was just a diary clash. This happened years ago. Alex Neil is now coming out and saying, he's actually categorically saying on Twitter that that's a lie, and saying that actually what happened was that Hamza Yousaf asked Alex Salmond, the leader, for permission to skip the vote because he was coming under too much pressure from imams outside of politics to vote against it. Hamza Yusuf says that this is categorically untrue. You know, there's a big sort of Barney happening, but it just, I think, shows how, you know, there is. This is obviously an important issue for lots of people. Kate Forbes has come into criticism for her position on it, but there is, you know, in Scotland there are so many things that are going wrong at the moment, in particular in relation to Hamza Yusuf. I mean, the state of Scottish healthcare is abysmal, and this is something that he was in charge of. I think it probably, to some people, can feel like this is sort of, as much as it would be a problem if Hamza Yusuf is found to have told a mistruth, or how you want to diplomatically put it, there are so much bigger fish to fry in Scottish politics. And actually the Telegraph goes into Ash Regan's plans, who's one of the hopefuls, to announce that Scotland is independent if the SNP wins the majority of seats and positions. Just announce it. And she said, well, you know, what would happen if Westminster said, hang on a minute? She says, it's none of their business. So, yeah.
Oh, there's interesting times ahead then.
But isn't it interesting, though, that gay marriage has become kind of the central component so far of the SNP leadership? I mean, this wouldn't have expected even a few weeks ago.
It feels like it was something that we'd all sort of agreed on and moved on. And again, reaffirming Ella's point, people are struggling to heat their homes, people are struggling to eat, health systems in crisis in Scotland and elsewhere. And again, we're arguing about leadership wrangles and a cover-up being worse than the original lie in this Hamza Yusuf case.
Tell me what actually matters.
Andy, let's go back to schools, shall we? And this time, riots in schools. It's in the Sun.
Yes, this is in lots of papers. A toilet riot, if you will. So what's been happening at various schools up and down the country is many schools have been saying to pupils, you can only use toilets at break time, because they were abusing the privilege of, you know, disappearing during lessons and not coming back. There's also been a huge argument across many schools of skirt lengths, and should you be wearing trousers, should you wear skirts? Male headmasters measuring girls' legs and this sort of thing, which is all a bit bizarre. This has led to an organised TikTok protest, which exploded yesterday with riots at different schools, where it's supposed to be a sort of organised, peaceful protest, and actually it's led to riot police being brought into a school in Yorkshire, where a tree was set on fire and a headmaster was knocked over. A school in Banbury was closed early for the day because they couldn't control the kids. It feels like something that was a fairly minor bone of contention has then sort of appeared on social media. Kids have got together, and kids have been kids, of course, rather a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
There is a sort of serious discussion in this, as some of the people are saying that it affects their mental health if they can't go to the toilet.
Give over. I left school 32 years ago.
It wasn't that long ago, was it?
Yes, it certainly was. Don't be sarky. The skirts had to be a certain length. Boys couldn't wear white socks. You couldn't go to the toilet in class time. I mean, nothing's changed. In fact, our mental health just had to hold on for 20 minutes till it was break and the bell went.
Yeah.
Come on.
But there is something to be said, isn't there, about when things hit social media, they can snowball. They snowball out of control.
Absolutely. I think also you see this with sort of international protests as well, where something happens in another country and then it becomes on social media, and then people who have got no attachment to it whatsoever exploding with rage. One of the interesting sort of sub-points of this is one school has banned skirts and is now telling the pupils to wear trousers because that's more gender neutral. And then some of the girls are saying, well, actually, we should have the choice and all of this sort of thing. And so this whole discussion about uniforms.
We're out of time, sadly. Ella, Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.